Start recording. Okay.
Whose voice is that?
I don't know.
The lady.
The lady, okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. This is, today we have an excellent guest, and I don't know what you, most of you do in the morning. I'm in the morning, I turn to I say, Alexa, and then I say, David. And then I hear from the New York Times, this is Sabrina Tavernise, and this is the Daily. And that's how I start my day. This is Sabrina Tavernise, and I'm so, no, you don't have to, please sit. So and this is my great pleasure to have Sabrina today for this series and conversation with Yevgenia Albats at Jordan Center Jordan Center for Advanced Study of Russia in New York University. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you to all those who are going to join us, already joined us on Zoom. Even if you never listen to the Daily, then you probably know this by line from the New York Times, Sabrina Tavernise. Sabrina started, she covered at least 3 wars, sectarian cleansing. The latest, she covered the beginning of the war in Ukraine. She was one of the first journalists at the field where, when the tragedy of MH17 happened. That's when the Malaysian airline air flight from Amsterdam to Malaysia was shot in the skies of Donbass. And I still remember, the essay that Sabrina wrote about that. It was amazing, absolutely amazing, very tragic, very difficult to read piece because there were a lot of kids on this plane. Sabrina apparently started in Magadan on Kalamata. Those of you who do Soviet and Russian politics, you do know that Magadan is a symbol of Soviet repression. That's Kalama River, it's the Russian far east and north, right? It's one of the worst places on earth. It's with one of the worst climate on earth. And of course, I'm going to ask you, what's on earth? You were a young girl back in 1995. What did bring you to Magadan? People were sent there.
Go voluntarily.
And so it's it's amazing. So she covered, she covered Baghdad, she covered Moscow, she covered Karachi, Istanbul, and she covered demographics and medicine for the New York Times while she was here in the United States because her husband happened to have some important government job. And of course, when the war started, in Ukraine, Sabrina found herself there, and she already joined the Daily as co-host. And so she was doing, all these interviews with people on the streets. And I was in Moscow back then. And I was listening to that, being in Moscow, and I was thinking, wow, what a great job she was doing. So please welcome Sabrina Tavernise. I will ask the questions. And then you will have time to ask her questions as well. We have to start with the main news for us journalists today. And that is that, last night in the city of Ekaterinburg, it's Russian Ural Mountains, a very good reporter, Wall Street Journal reporter, Evan Grishkovich got arrested on the charges of espionage. He went to Ekaterinburg to do a story about recruitment process of Wagner Group in the Ural Mountains. He also, as far as I understand, he interviewed workers at the famous Ural Vagon Zavod. Those of you who don't know nothing about that, That's the plant where Soviets, Russians produced tanks. It became famous during the Russian protests of 2011-2012 when the leader of one of the workers addressed Putin as saying, Vladimir Vladimirovich, if you need help to crash all these liberals in Moscow, plus, and we, Ural Vagon Zavod, is going to come and smash these liberals. Of course, they never did, but it doesn't matter. But he interviewed apparently people there as well. We know very little about the case. He got arrested. Today he was already in court, and he's going to spend the next 2 months, or 1 month and 29 days, in Lefortovo jail. That's the FSB jail in Moscow, KGB jail in Moscow. If he, and already, all Russian officials said that, they got him red-handed. We don't know what they mean, but if he convicted, he's facing 20 years in Russian jail, and that's a real hell. Now, it's important to tell you that the last time an American journalist was arrested in Moscow, in Russia, it was still the Soviet Union. It was 1986. Nicholas Danilov, who was working with the Boston Globe, I believe. You could check on Newsweek. So anyway, he was all of a sudden he was arrested, but it was still the Soviet Union. Yes, Gorbachev already was the civil secretary. Anyway, there were cases during the Stalinist times when journalists, reporters had to escape. There were a couple of cases, but in fact, Soviets were very, very careful with journalists. And so what happened today is an extraordinary thing, and very, very sad thing for us journalists, because it means that foreign journalists, and especially American journalists, are no longer able to work in Russia. So what do you think?
I would ask you what you think, Shane. If this is a story that is happening now, I would say who would have the best and clearest and most insightful understanding of what this means about where we are in Russia right now is you. I mean, I think
Do an interview with me.
I think clearly, it's a very sad thing, I think, for us journalists. And the idea that we have gotten to the point where this is happening in Russia. I mean, I feel like I keep kind of casting my mind back. So I first got to Russia in when I was just a baby reporter. Actually, before I was a reporter, in the early 1990s, 1994.
Not 1995 in Magadan.
4 or 5, 94, 95. Yeah, that was.
And you were working for USAID.
I was actually working for a group of people at University of Alaska. They had a money from USAID, which was very much in vogue at the time. The American government was giving a lot of money to different groups in the United States so that they could come to Russia and, promote democracy or teach business. I mean, I put everything kind of in air quotes because they were sort of doing that, but sort of also not doing that. Promote democracy. And I, at the time, it was just this really, freewheeling, open place that was kind of like waking up from this long dream, really. And anything went. And obviously, you came to a point in the later 1990s that was very, it was too much for people. They didn't want everything everything goes as too much at some point for a society. But I think of how much we've lost and how truly I've been kind of thinking through an episode that we would like to do about what's changed since the war started, or since the invasion in February, and the things that people are getting arrested for now. Posting something on social media was really not something that the authorities would really bother with, and now it's giving, it's landing people 8.5 years in prison. Or more. So our reporter has been following a number of these cases, and I just think how sad it is for the country that I knew. I mean, my kind of the way that I described Russia when in the invasion and then after the invasion, and I think we were all kind of trying to come to terms with how shocking that was. I mean, for us people who knew and loved Russia, it was like I had a very dear friend, a dear old friend, who had lost their mind, who had just kind of like completely, gone out of the world of how we all understand things in our common language for things. It was doing something truly crazy and truly against its own interest. And yeah, I think this kind of is part and parcel of that. I mean, it's
You make, your response is extremely troublesome to me. Because, yes, of course, we know that journals were used in the past for intelligence purposes. They were used, of course, in the Soviet Union, the bureau, they say Pravda bureau in Washington, D.C., there were 2 intelligence officers and 1 journalist, because somebody was supposed to do it, this agree. There was the same true at some point with the American journalists, and books are written about that, of course, in this country. But then there was, the special provision made not to use, that forbid using American journals for these purposes, precisely because it endangers journalists. It goes against the profession. It's not our job to provide intelligence. But besides that, I know Evan. I know that he's a very good reporter. My suspicion, and I'm not going to, but I just think that it's important that we talk about that. At least, for me, it is very important. It's part of my life and my understanding of the job we do. In December of 2022, in Slovenia, 2 allegedly Russian illegals were arrested in Ljubljana. If you go to the Guardian website, there is Sean Walker, a great reporter, who is writing a book about illegals and who did already, great reporting on that stuff. So he published a piece. Apparently, these 2 illegal, there's a suspicion that there were Russian illegals pretending to be the guy. It's a couple, kids. They're originally by their passports, they're from South America, but they speak Spanish without accent, just the way it happened to the Soviet illegals, so-called conserve. 10 of them were here in the United States, and they were arrested during the Obama administration. Uncovered and arrested, and all of them are back home in Moscow now. So these 2 illegals, according to the Sean Walker piece, they were involved in money distribution to other illegals across the region, because obviously, it became very difficult to move money for Russian, especially for Russian intelligence. So anyway, to cut a long story short, Putin might be looking for the exchange fund. Because, for instance, one of the reasons why there was latest exchange between Wood and Greiner, there was supposed to do another exchange. Also, there is another American sitting in the Russian jail who was accused of being a spy, and so Russians refused to exchange him because they said, we're going to exchange it only spy for spy. So supposedly, the reason why Evan was arrested because they need more people as exchange, more Americans to held as hostages and then to exchange. I have my director here, So,
You said you'd know the answer. I knew you.
I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. I just think what may happen and why they did it. And I just cannot imagine. Yes, Leforto is much better than it was. There was now hot water now there, but still, it's one of the worst jails in Moscow. And I just cannot imagine, next week is Passover, and so that Evan is going to have his first Seder in the jail cell. Anyway, tell me, what were you doing in Magadan?
I was teaching Russians how to do business. I was doing.
Why Magadan?
So
Of all places.
Well, I'll tell you, I graduated from college from university in 1993. And my entire time in university was taken up with these incredible things happening in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union collapsing and the Berlin Wall falling, and all of these things were happening. And I was sitting in a very boring classroom memorizing verbs, Russian verbs, but still. And I thought the thing I wanted to do most in the world was to go to Russia and to seek my fortune and to explore it and to learn. And I fell in love with the literature. I fell in love with the crazy, sort of messy, but charming, and also kind of disastrous history. And I wanted to go and explore. And when I graduated, I remember calling all over the place, trying to kind of get a job in Moscow. Moscow is kind of the logical place people would go.
Remind me, you graded from Columbia, right?
Barnard College of Columbia University, yes. Yep. 93. And so I started, in those days, you would fax your resume places. I faxed many, many, many resumes. I know, Olga's holding her face. Terrible, you have a whole stack of them and you're faxing. So I was faxing to, law firms. I could be a paralegal. I could do this, I could do that. No one hired me or even gave me anything, even for non-pay. And then I remember at some point I thought, I was very intrepid in those days. And I thought, okay, call Alaska. This was before Sarah Palin had her Alaska moment. I literally had it first. I thought, I'm gonna, maybe there's some connection there. And so, and this is actually the weirdest thing. I'm just saying it now, but it's really true. I called the National Audubon Society. I was just going through a list of nonprofits. I was going to call every single one of them in the state of Alaska. And I don't know if it's number 10 or what it was, but I called the National Audubon Society, and there was someone named Bucky who answered the phone. And she was like, well, I think we have some sort of a couple of month environmental science summer camp type program for Russian teenagers in Magadan. She was like kind of trying to pronounce it, and I was like, oh, Magadan, whoa. And I said, that sounds right up my alley. I'd love to do that. And so I went. They didn't pay me anything, but they did pay my way. And I spent 2.5 months on this actually, we got to Magadan and we were taken by boat. And so you have to know Magadan is the eastern coast of Russia. So really kind of, out there. Like Janie's saying, usually there's kind of a famous saying in Russian that when someone says they're from Magadan, and you say, I'm from Magadan, you should come visit. It's a nice place. Russian will say, it's better that you come to us in Moscow, because people went to Magadan because they were sent there for the labor camp. So it's a very famous kind of scary place. But this was Magadan in 1995. So I got there and it was really still, well, let me do the summer camp thing. So anyway, I spend 3 months or 2.5, I guess, a bit sort of doing this training thing, and then out with these high school kids. And it involves taking a boat for like 6 hours up the coast. They drop us at a point and in a nature preserve. Me, this very unsuspecting woman from Chugach National Forest, this Alaskan woman who's an educator and has a very nice tent that kind of sets up when you just flick your wrist. All the kids were just amazed. And we were out there, for weeks. And that was how I kind of my initial introduction. And then on my way back, when I was finishing that summer camp thing, I met some University of Alaska people on the plane on the way back, and they said, "Oh, we have this little business center in Magadan, and it's trying to kind of teach Russians how to do business." And I was like, "Do Russians really need to be taught how to do business?" And they were like, "We don't know, but USAID has given us some money to do it." So, so I literally landed, got back on the plane, went back, and then stayed for the better part of 2 years, being an administrator in this little business center. And in Magadan, just also incredibly snowy, wintry place. It had like the snow would just go up and up and up and up, and you'd have like these passageways carved through the snow. It is up there and out there. And it was also kind of a place in the world where I thought, I literally had nothing in my mind. I could kind of imagine the Risk board a little bit, like Irkutsk, and I don't know if you guys have played Risk, but so I sort of had a game board sense of, but what it would look like, and kind of, everything about it was just so interesting and new to me. It's so northern, it has these kind of very sort of bent trees because it's constant wind, and it's sort of low scrub pine. It's this very specific, in tundra. It's very beautiful, very specific landscape. And it was like being in a very really remote part of Russia, in the early part of Russia understanding who it was after the Soviet collapse. And the first winter I was there, they basically all but ran out of coal to heat people's houses. It was very cold. The grocery stores didn't have really much of anything yet. It was like kind of a shriveled beach. It was basically still Soviet times. And then the following winter, it was just this profusion of goods, dog food, cat litter, sausage from Holland, peppers, and it was just absolutely unaffordable to the average person in Magadan. So it was, you kind of I saw it in stages of sort of how it changed and how it became this very, raw capitalism in a way that made people poor and, angry at what was happening kind of politically in the country.
Who were your students? Whom did you teach?
Basically, well, the dirty secret was people all wanted to sign up for these business courses because they were they charged some nominal fee, but it wasn't that much. But at the end of the business course, you got to go to Anchorage, Alaska, to shadow in a business that you wanted to start. For 2 weeks. So you put up in a hotel, and I don't think I was actually the driver. I may have been the driver for parts of this, but basically what people wanted was they wanted to go to Anchorage, and they wanted to go buy car batteries, buy tires, they wanted to go and buy shit, which was completely logical, and that was that was something that they could do. So that was very sought after, and I think actually gave people the chance to sort of be in the US for a bit and kind of taste what that was like, and meet people, and I think I don't know I wouldn't hazard to say how useful it actually was after the fact, but it was the people who were teaching, it was kind of a string of avuncular, very kind of esteemed but retired business professors from University of Alaska and Anchorage who would, come and they would say, well, this is what a loan is, and this is an interest rate, and the Russian would be like, okay, what happens if the interest rate is 7,000%? And they'd be like, I don't know. So it went like that usually,
For me, Magadan, if you remember, this Yevgenia Ginsburg, Крутой маршрут. What's this English? Крутой маршрут.
Oh, into the whirlwind.
Yes, and that's, remember, thank you so much. Remember the last chapter when, Yevgenia Ginsburg, she spent, a decade in the prison camp, and that now she's released, and her son came to see her, and her husband shot, of course. And they allowed to live in Magadan. And there are people living in the pits. These oldest former prisons in in the pits, with the way, big pits where this canalization was there, and tubes and etc. And so prisoners who were released from the Gulag, they didn't have place to go, they didn't have place to live, so they lived literally in these pits. That's for me, Magadan. Magadan was always in our, in the myth. This was, place where prisoners. So your students, were they former Zakar? Were they former prisoners?
There was actually an American graduate student who was doing some oral histories of people who had been prisoners in Magadan. Who actually, so yes, there were still living people who had been in prison there. There were a lot of people who had come out in the 60s. They called them ethnicity, like sort of a kind of a younger generation who wanted to were idealistic about kind of building communism. I guess you can help me out with the history here. And were very, they had kind of built a university there. A lot of the people I hung around with were their kids. They were sort of guitar playing intellectuals, children of intellectuals who'd come out in the 60s. It was just, gosh, it was like there was a guy from Dagestan I remember very well who we eventually ended up hiring. It was kind of a mishmash of people who'd ended up there, and then who, were effectively stuck because they're, in the Soviet times when you were working in Magadan, you would have special benefits. You would be able to take longer vacations because it's really hard to live out there. You'd had extra pensions and things like that, and all of that went away like overnight. With the Soviet collapse, so you had a lot of people, impoverished like the rest of the country, but stuck in this place where, flying to Moscow was an 8-hour flight and expensive. Getting food was much more expensive. All of this stuff, and it was a bitter pill, I think, for people to swallow, to have the kind of, young economic reformers in Moscow come out and tell them, you guys should never have even been here to begin with. This is was a mistake. And then and so it was painful, because a lot of people really couldn't escape the circumstances. And they went out for many reasons, but then they were stuck. Yeah.
Okay, fast forward.
Yeah.
So you worked for Business Insider, BusinessWeek, until you joined the New York Times. And then you started covering wars. Tell me, my understanding that for journalists in this country, covering the war, it's like, you have to do this. Is it true?
Have to do it. I think it takes a certain breed or something. Covering wars, I think I was maybe born without the gene of nervousness for my own physical safety. I don't know how, or maybe that's just called youth. I don't know. You tell me, Jen, you've just been in a war zone, so. But I think, I think it is, I guess, at the times or anywhere really, it is some rite of passage in journalism that this is like perhaps, the most extreme circumstances that human beings can find themselves in and what that does to kind of the human psyche and societies and the weird shapes that stretches them into is something that I think is a rich area for journalism.
When did you feel more insecure, covering Iraq or covering Ukraine?
That's a good question because they were very different. So Iraq was, the quick short answer is probably covering Iraq. However, in the beginning of Ukraine, maybe that's not true. So Iraq was, I first went to Iraq in 2003. At the beginning when we first went, the American invasion and, Bush declares mission accomplished, and then obviously, and we know the history there. But you could drive from sort of one end of the country to the other, in the course of a day, and you could, talk to people everywhere. And this is the very beginning, so I would say August of 2003, or perhaps, yeah. So the invasion was March, and then through the summer. So it was this wide open kind of thing, and then. I could just even think of the timeline. So huge UN bombing in August of 2003, kidnapping very famously of an NGO, of female NGO worker, and beheading in September of 2003. Contractors hung from a bridge in Fallujah in February 2004. And so it just started, it went from wide open to like movie screen to like television screen to like over the course of probably a year. And we at the New York Times had, ways that we would manage the risk. So we went from driving all over the place and being dressed like this and just talking to people to, being careful which parts of Iraq we drove to, putting on abaya and hijab and having two cars, because if one car breaks down, you always need to have a second car. So we really adjusted over the course of time. And that was largely because Westerners or foreigners generally were huge targets. Iraqis were also huge targets. They were being killed in huge numbers in what ended up descending into like a civil conflict. But if you're kind of like a sort of a light-haired, light-eyed person sitting in traffic in a car in Baghdad with like everybody staring at you, it's like a very dangerous situation. So, and there've been many kidnappings. So that was, but we learned how to manage that risk, and we knew what parts, and we had 80 Iraqis working for us at the New York Times at the time. So huge staff, many people, from coming from all over the city. So we knew kind of, which neighborhoods we could go to, which neighborhoods we couldn't. So Iraq in the Ukraine in the beginning, is you kind of understood, like, we had gotten really good at managing the risk, even though it was still quite dangerous, and you understood where you could go and where you couldn't, and you knew where the front line was, and you knew the closer you approached to that, the more dangerous it was going to be for you physically. But, if you stayed behind it, you were probably going to be okay. Ukraine was like kind of off uncharted waters for me because, we just didn't know what he was going to do. We didn't know what was going to happen, and there was all this kind of like very, very sort of kind of breathless talk about thermobaric bombs, and is he going to what's going to happen? Like, is it going to like how is he going to attack? Is it going to be some chemical weapons thing, some tactical nuke thing? And
so that's 2014.
No, this is the invasion in February.
You mean the latest phase.
In the latest phase, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. And this past February. So I was in Kiev. I had gone for the Daily. So I had already started my job at the Daily, it's the podcast. And it was a bit, it was so kind of unbelievable to me that Russia, that this would happen at all, that it sort of knocked me out of my kind of hard-bitten war reporter mode where I felt like I knew how to manage risk and I knew kind of where to go and where not to go, and I knew how to act and I knew how to put my body, and I knew what to do with a seatbelt if I had a flak jacket on, all those things. This just felt like, again, my friend lost his mind. I just had no idea how it was gonna go. And so I was actually very worried at the beginning, as my husband Corey will attest. We were talking a lot, and a number of reporters left. There was several that I was kind of people who were working with at the times, one as a photographer, and then his girlfriend, and then we had a Ukrainian colleague and they all kind of decided they didn't want to take the risk.
They left the country.
Yes, or perhaps I think it was they pulled way back to Western Ukraine, and kind of because it felt, the target was Kiev, and that was kind of, you remember that column coming down, and it became clear relatively quickly, within a couple of I'd say 2 weeks maybe, that like it was stuck, and perhaps it wasn't going to be this like shock and awe that we were expecting. But I remember very clearly that the 24th of February was the invasion. That happened to be my birthday. So I was kind of up, and like I had some friends and we were having some dinner, and then we were starting to kind of get sort of inklings that this might be happening on that night. And I think Putin had his Security Council meeting, so it was like it was building up to it. And
February 22nd, right?
I think it was the 20th, or maybe it was 23rd. Maybe it was. I think it was the night before that. And hold on. I suddenly completely lost my train of thought. Where was I going?
You were talking about that people were
here,
leaving.
yes, exactly.
Yes.
So I was already working for my podcast, and I have big team back in New York. Like lots of podcaster kids, big podcasting headphones, and I was saying, and they were saying they were all going home for the weekend. We had just done this big show of the invasion, and they said, okay, have a great weekend, Sabrina. Hope all's okay. And I was like, guys, like, I mean, there might be like, it might be Russian territory by the time you come back on Monday. Like we literally thought that kind of, they were going to sweep in and take something, or they were going to. It was going to be kind of like, it was going to be easy for them. And then of course it wasn't. But certainly in the early days, I felt, I was very worried for my safety, for our safety. And at times was as well. I mean, they at some point pulled us back to a part of, to Western Ukraine, because they didn't want to come. So yeah, to Lviv, exactly. So many people, if something big did happen and there was some, air war, sudden air war, that they wouldn't lose, 15 reporters at once, because we had a video group and we had a bunch of photographers, and they had me from audio, and we had probably 6 or 7 reporters. So it was a lot of people on the ground.
Tell me, when it's one thing, we used to write, pen and paper, and that's it,
Yeah.
for very convenient. Now, so when you do your daily, and especially when it's
Yeah.
how many people do you have there, and how do you do this? I listened to you sitting in Moscow, you were making these interviews with people who were running from Kiev. I remember this just as if it was yesterday.
Yeah.
So tell me, how do you do this? Well, technically, how do you do it?
Technically.
How you do this, I know this, what was it like for you to switch from writing stories to sort of, producing and speaking, and I don't know what else, you do with your stories. So just bring us to this, show us what it's like.
So first of all, I thank you for that question, Jane, because this is interesting. I had been a print reporter for 20 years, a long time. I was always also pen and paper,
Right.
always pen and paper. And I started doing this podcasting. I started doing audio stories. And the first one we did actually was a number of years ago in Baltimore. It was a series about a woman who lost her son in a police shooting. And it was kind of her it was sort of a five episodes about her. So it was a very deep story about her. And I remember at a certain point thinking, oh my God, this is just an unbelievable medium. I mean, you hear her voice, like you hear how, how painful it is to lose a son, but also how much she's grappling with what it meant that, he had been involved in something that she wasn't sure about and that she felt like might have actually been the thing that ended up leading to his death. And like having that, and then having music and drums and like pauses, and like I got to sort of put all that together. I mean, I am a very talented audio colleague because I am myself not assembling them physically, so I can explain that too. Was just like I felt like I had worked my whole life in black and white, and suddenly I was seeing color, and I just was like, I was completely blown away by it. I just felt like it was so much more powerful as a medium. It just like got right in the part of your brain where you're just kind of, you're having an emotional reaction to the thing and you're feeling the thing in a way that I didn't feel was possible in most of my print stuff. So I had this huge crush on this medium. And I thought it was just like, for storytelling, it was just incredibly powerful. And so, going to Ukraine, so I had a few things going on. So I was supposed to go with two colleagues. And at the last minute, one of them found out she was pregnant.
Happens.
It does. And the other, just had made a very, just felt like this was going to be a really dangerous thing, which it was, and just decided like, I want to wait and see how this is going to go and don't want to plunge into the unknown, which was completely understandable. But, it did mean that I was actually getting on a plane, going to Kiev in this new medium alone, which, the thing was, I knew war and I knew Russia, and I knew how to kind of work in this environment. So I thought, I'll be fine. I don't know this medium, but I'll figure it out. But the other problem, it's a 7-hour time difference. So I'm getting all this, I'm going around recording people and getting all this tape, and I'm sending it back. And the podcasters are like, Sabrina, it's all in Russian. We have no idea what you're saying. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, right. Okay, so then I had to think, okay, but we had a 7-hour time difference, and we were having to make shows every day, so we didn't have enough time to go back through stuff, and we were really doing stuff on deadline every single day. So the only way I figured out how to do it was just to translate as I was going along, whatever the person was saying, the best I could, because I was like, and then that, 7 hours of tape that I had, I would send back to them. And I would say, like, I think this guy, I think the ambulance guy, I think the kid with the parakeet in the train station, and I think this guy, these are the best moments. And then they would like assemble a show from that.
Did you have a fix for that? Did you have to find all this?
I had, so generally foreign correspondence relies heavily on, local reporter who can help you, find people, take you around, you need to interview the finance minister, helps do that, you're kind of, I didn't have one because people, it was like an invasion in a war, and people basically either were leaving or were trying to make frantic, arrangements for their own families and stuff like that. And I spoke Russian, so I did. So for the most part, I was fine.
And you were taping yourself.
Yes, I was taping myself. And then, and the Daily is just full of incredibly talented, very, very brilliant people who really know how to make audio. And they were saying, and they were giving me instructions. They were saying, Sabrina, you can't just it's almost like you're a movie. So you have the big pan shot where you can rise up above and see that you're in this big market, probably in Kiev because there's like a church in the background. And then, but you also want to kind of zoom in right exactly to the face of the kid holding the little tomato carton with a parakeet inside and his suitcase, and he's leaving on the train. So you want to establish like the establishing shot of kind of where you are, what you're doing, what time it is, and what is happening at the moment, but then also have kind of have the camera lens focus much more tightly on the kind of the details so that people feel like they're there. So it's kind of almost like, yeah, it's almost like a movie, imagining the movie. And so they were saying that to me, I was just sending really close in stuff, the kid and the, and the shoe and the sneaker and the woman going by with a roller bag. And they were like, we don't know where we are. Like, where are you? This is interesting, but we need an establishing shot for you to say, I'm in the train station, it's Kiev, it's the second day. You would not believe how many people are in the bus station. People are like trying to pack up. So like that is, but anyway, so that's kind of part of that.
What was it like at the beginning of the war?
It was a frenzy of leaving. I think I remember, getting so many, I was just going around with my microphone, scooping up sounds everywhere. Again, roller bags, people like jamming onto buses, people kind of camped in train stations, not even knowing where they were going to be going. A women and children's kind of room in the upper part of the train station in Kiev was just like full of, just like people, I mean, I remember having a conversation with a woman, people who didn't want to leave. And this was the case for many people. And for the most part, it was women and children leaving. The men weren't leaving so much. They weren't by law supposed to be leaving. So, you had these huge crowds of women and their children and just saying like, I can't, I'm not like my head is telling me I have to go, but my heart is saying like, this is crazy. I can't do it. So it's like, I think, in the very beginning of conflict, before it actually, the violence actually begins and it actually starts to rip apart, you have people, middle-class people who yesterday were worried about like getting their kid to soccer practice on time, having to come to terms with the reality that they are about to become homeless, lose all of their stuff, maybe lose someone in their family. And like, they are like, it's just like watching a car crash in slow motion. I mean, it is crazy. It is crazy to like watch them process that and have to like have their hearts catch, their brains know they have to go and their hearts don't want, just like have the heart and the head kind of catch up. That's a little bit, I've mangled that a little bit, but it's very much coming to a realization that like the life they had is gone. They cannot go back to it. And they have to like immediately like, make very quick decisions to make sure that their kids are safe. And that is just really hard and painful.
What was going on through your mind? You worked a lot in Russia, you have a lot of friends in Moscow. You speak language, I don't remember whether you ever worked, in fact, in Ukraine, except for 2014, in fact,
yeah.
Except for Donbass and etc. But anyway, what was going on through their mind? Russia invaded Ukraine. What was going on?
I couldn't believe it, Jane. I mean, I don't know how you felt, but I couldn't believe it. It's funny, I was making an argument to our show that we should probably go because, there's a reasonable chance this might happen, as the American government is telling us, because they were leaking all of this stuff. And, I know from war zones that like once violence begins, airports shut down, it takes you a week to drive overland from someplace to get into the zone. So, we should go now while Turkish Airlines is still flying. And so I was kind of like agitating, but I genuinely, I got there on the 22nd and genuinely thought like, I still don't actually think this is going to happen. I mean, I really thought that, even though all of the signs were that it was. So I couldn't believe it, but I feel like, and I know you and I, Yevgenia, have conversations about this. You know, it just, I feel like when you look back, and you were the one who was right all along, Yevgenia. I feel like when I look back at myself and how I saw what was happening with Russia and with Putin, you know, I could always kind of find some sort of a, excuse is the wrong word, but some sort of a justification from Russia's perspective for what was happening. Like, the Georgia war things is a kind of a short, Russia's incursion into Georgia in 2008. Well, Saakashvili was kind of crazy, and it was short little thing, and it really, they weren't. There were deaths, I'm sure, but I can't actually remember. But like, it was a one-off. And then 2014 was, oh, that's pretty bad, but well, it's sort of just Crimea, and that was kind of historically Russian, okay. And then it's like, oh, but then there are this kind of, the slicing off the eastern part in Donbass, and that was, but it's just, he's not really going in. You knew like, okay, this is bad, but okay. But this was like, would he really do this? And then when you look back, and of course he did it, right? And you look back and you think, oh, he was leaving us breadcrumbs all along. And we just refused to see them, or at least I did. I mean, Yevgenia did see them very clearly, but I have to say, I feel like I did not.
Still, what is your explanation? Because I guess, all of us were struggling with that. What's his end game? I mean, why did he do this in the first place? We live together, Russians and Ukrainians, side by side for centuries, right? We, our families are, many of us, we have, families in Ukraine and in Russia and etc. Why? He's destroying two countries as we speak, right?
Yeah.
So what is your explanation, And I also interested, what Ukrainians were telling you in Kyiv, because they probably spoke Russian to you,
Yeah.
right?
He thinks, I mean, their explanation in large part was he thinks we don't exist. He thinks we are him. He thinks, Ukraine is Russia, that Ukraine isn't, it's not a country, that it's a very genocidal impulse.
Okay, you think that Ukrainian is Russia, then why to bomb it? What's the logic?
That's true. Jane, this is a question for you. I mean, I'm completely flummoxed by it. I can't explain it. It just goes against the laws of gravity in every way. And as you say, the whole lead up to the war was like, well, but he couldn't possibly do this to Kyiv. I mean, this is crazy. And it is crazy. I mean, from objectively. But there's gotta be you put him on the couch. I mean, what's going on in his head that like he's doing this? He is not, this is everything, he has staked everything on this, and he's still going for it. Like, I don't know, we've been doing so many kind of like Putin on the couch things, but you think like he's a guy who makes the weather completely. He could say, oh, we've had success and the war's over, and there was a lot of kind of analysis of who he's painted himself into a corner, but like he can kind of make another corner, right? He's like, so I just don't understand why, particularly after everything that's happened over the past year. I mean, it's been a disaster for them. It's been a disaster for, I'm working with our correspondent there right now, Valerie Hopkins, and just so many people coming back, coffins, bodies, like this is a problem for him.
Valerie Hopkins, she's in Moscow, I believe, is she?
Yeah.
is she going to stay in Moscow now? Oh, okay, I'm not supposed to ask this. No, I know, it's better not to ask. Right, but you know that, there were Mark Sedan, who's a great Financial Times
Oh, he's
correspondent.
so good, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
they canceled his visa last December, Russians.
Yeah, I mean,
Side by
the
side.
visa stuff is
Yeah.
very, very difficult. So, yeah, I mean, we're moving into a new phase of some sort, right? What is it? I don't know. But Jenny, what's your answer to the question of why is he doing it?
I think that he had this intention back in 2014. At least that's what sources say. That when he started the war in Donbass, when he annexed Crimea and then he started the war in Donbass, some of his advisors advised him to go and occupy Kyiv right away. So just to end up this problem by the name Ukraine, because Putin doesn't believe that people are capable to fight for their freedoms and their liberties. And the very fact that twice under his watch, Ukrainians kicked out their presidents when they didn't like them, 2014, Maidan, 2013, Revolution of Dignity, and, Yanukovych is running away. So Putin saw it as just violation of all things he believes in, This is the supreme power, and all of a sudden, these small people, just all of a sudden they decide they don't like this president. What if Russians decide the same? I think that for Putin, it was an awful example that was right around the corner. He was 800 kilometers from Moscow. And all these Russians, you saw that, when, all of us were watching when, Zelensky was running for the presidency. 67%, he got, people were voting around. It was clear that people were electing their own president, So anyway, I think that Putin decided at some point that having the Ukrainian like that was too bad example that Russians may learn how to fight for their freedoms. Clearly, we didn't.
Yeah.
But he thought that we're going to learn from Ukrainians. And that's why he wanted to end up this mutiny right away, just get it under the carpet, resolve this problem, forget about that. That's what I think and of course, he believed in that Russia had the second army in the world. So he believed that it was going to happen quickly, and he underestimated everything.
Yeah.
Now, once again, fast forward, talking about the daily. I understand this pleasure for radio because I did, this radio for quite some time, and at Echo Moscow. But basically, we had a sound person, and we had a producer. That's it. Tell me, but when at the end on Friday. At the end of your show, when you start naming all the people who were involved, I am like, really? So tell me, how many people do you have?
You mean how many people total on the staff?
No, yes. First of all, how many people don't on the staff? And how?
I should know this exact number. I'm not sure the exact number, and we've been hiring a bunch, so probably 40.
40.
Yeah, that's
The whole news. Okay.
well, no, just for the daily.
I know.
Yeah.
It's more than I had in my
Oh, I
new
see.
times. Okay, so you have a show each day.
Yeah, 5 days a week.
5 days,
Mhm.
right? So when do you decide what's going to be on the show? Next morning, I'm going to wake up, right? And don't forget, I'm going to say, Alexa, baby. So when do you decide what you're going to cover next day?
We have a rolling conversation about the next day throughout the day. Largely, we have a meeting every morning at 10 a.m. And then
In person or over Zoom?
half and half. Actually, more people join remotely, I suppose. But I was in the office today, so yeah, people actually come to it. And we have we talk about we talk about every possibility, what's the week gonna look like, what could Tuesday be? Does Tuesday make more sense? The Trump indictment has been the slippery thing that we've been trying to game out, what if it happens on Friday, then does the cat, so we're constantly reevaluating based on what's happening in the news and based on what reporter might be able to do a thing. I mean, I remember kind of one example, but back after Bucha, we wanted to do an episode on war crimes and how they, what they are, how they get defined, how they get prosecuted, and it was kind of it was a topic that spanned a couple of different reporters. There was someone in Geneva who sort of knew legally about it. Then there was Roger Cohen, he'd been in the former Yugoslavia for a long time, and so had kind of like an active understanding in a specific case study, but like no one kind of knew the whole thing. So that's a consideration. We call, the daily, we like to refer to as the front page of the New York Times in audio. So we're very news focused, but also we're in a way, we're also a little bit like a magazine in that we're not just kind of saying, this is something that happened and these were the 3 events that happened yesterday. We're going deeply into a topic. So there needs to be enough there, both that the reporter knows, but also kind of that's under the hood of the thing to really be able to have a show, to fill a 25-minute show. It's a pretty long time.
Who has a final say? What will be the main theme tomorrow morning?
It's pretty much a group decision, honestly. And if producers, I mean, ultimately, we have a couple of different options, and then a group of editors pull the trigger on that. But the producers have a lot of say in what they think is interesting and what they think might make the show. I mean, they fundamentally make the show. So, if I bring up a topic and no one thinks it's interesting, it's not going to get made.
And then what? You do sort of, like, you write sort of a screenplay. How it happens,
So
you write a story, projected story. What?
No, so we call a reporter. We spend usually between half an hour and sometimes an hour on the phone with a reporter. I did this morning with the reporter who's in Juarez, Mexico right now, covering the fire at the migrant facility where 39 people were burned to death on Monday. Says something about the US really, since the Trump years, outsourcing its immigration problems and immigration policy to Mexico, and the problems that has caused on all these border towns in Mexico. So I talked to the reporter for an hour. I really dig deep in kind of like, what's the reporter's insights? What's the reporter seen? He's been in Juarez. He interviewed a woman whose husband was very wounded in the fire. And then we go off, let the reporter off the phone, because the reporter's got a lot to do. And we did that with the poor overloaded Jerusalem bureau chief earlier this week. And we were like,
that's the day before.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That
Today
was
was Wednesday, it was Tuesday.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. And so, yeah. And so then we peel off. And then we do kind of a sort of think through what kind of an arc of questions would be that would allow him to, show the insights that he has, but in a way that kind of lays it out in a narrative fashion. So it's kind of, we sort of have the beginning is kind of the establishing details of like, and the kind of the thesis statement of what the episode's going to say. And then usually there's some kind of parts of chronology, the part where you go back and say, well, the interesting thing about Israel is that it actually doesn't, the balance of power is the Supreme Court in Israel. There is not a constitution. There is not an upper house of parliament. This, the reason why it feels so existential for Israelis is that, this is purely and only the check on the elected parliament. So, and so you to understand that, you need to go back to kind of, see when the Israeli judicial, so we would go back and kind of explain, how it came to be in the state of Israel that like this was the balance of power. So we usually have kind of a history section, and honestly, like those are the parts of the episode that I feel really kind of stick to the listener's ribs after they come out of it. So it's not just, if you turn on, just a kind of a news radio report in the morning, it's like, well, yeah, in Jerusalem yesterday, there were some people protesting outside the Knesset, and, and then Netanyahu did this thing and kind of reversed course, and that was it. Whereas we say, like, okay, Netanyahu did this thing. What does it say about where Israel is right now? Why is it that people feel like this is an existential crisis? Like, it's a court. I mean, what's the and then you get to go back into the history and explain it. And then, closer to the end of the episode, you'll have some analysis from the reporter, where they think it's going. Yeah, so that's what we do. And then we do a formal interview with the reporter. So we sort of talk to the reporter twice.
But then there is also, I understand, there is post-production.
Yeah.
Because when you listen to this,
Mhm.
you see that you put, information beats and you put jingles, and there are a lot of post-production, I think, going. How many people are working on that?
On any given episode, I mean, not surprisingly few. I mean, not as many as you would think. There are usually 2 producers and an editor. So
And who is making all this?
the producers and the editor together. So it's a big work. I mean, so
Yeah.
they will be. So I will have a conversation with the interview with the reporter. The reporter sends their recording. I send mine, and then they cut that. So it's it's not the whole conversation. It's excerpts from the conversation. But then in the story that the reporter tells, it's like there's often newsreel, 39 people died. What, like you'll hear a speech from someone. We had
Also sounds from the street.
exactly sound from the streets, or the sound. I mean, when I was in Ukraine, it was a lot of like, you hear an air raid siren, you hear, things that kind of bring you there. So it's like, in a way, like a little, like I would say movie, but not movie, but like documentary. When you hear, from in the Israeli courts episode, we had the sort of grandfather of the court reform of the courts in the early 1990s, talking about why he thought the courts needed to be strengthened. He was talking in Hebrew. We have a Hebrew speaker on our staff. She made sure that the tape was placed exactly as the reporter was. So, it's a huge amount of work that goes into making one episode. So I would say, they spend many, many hours on post-production.
Do you understand, right, that, in terms of business, it's a huge success. It's a great success story. It is.
Huge success. We have millions of people who listen every day, download every day, including part of that is several hundred public radio stations around the country. They have the Daily on their show, as part of their regular programming. And it was invented by a very brilliant group of people that made it out of whole cloth. They created it, and it was many people have tried to replicate it since they created it in 2017, but it was just incredibly useful thing because it's as you hear in the morning, it's 20 minutes, which is usually about the space of a commute, and you can actually feel like you truly understand a topic in the news, which I find hugely helpful. I mean, even as a person in the news business, before I ever worked for the Daily or was involved in it, I was a constant consumer. I would, and in fact, there would be, and I shouldn't admit this because hopefully none of my colleagues in the New York Times are listening to this. There would be, the New York Times is a big paper. There's a lot going on, tons of stories. I don't have time to read, all the stories about the baby formula crisis or all the stories about the BP oil spill. I probably would have read, but like I can't keep up with everything. And I would often think, oh God, another. And then I would think, oh, I'm going to wait till the Daily does it. And the Daily did it. And I'm like, oh, great. That is, I'm deep in it now. I understand it. I don't have to go back and read, 17 days of coverage of this thing and figure out kind of what the context is, what the broader frame is, how I should understand the thing. And that I think is incredibly useful. Oh, one of the things, Jane, that we do, which I find a huge public service and I feel very proud of, although they're extremely hard to do, are Supreme Court oral argument episodes. So, most of the Supreme Court decisions over the course of a term, I'd say they're, in any given term between, 4 and even 10. 10 is probably too many, but that we would want to cover on the show. And you can listen to oral arguments for Supreme Court. It's been public for some time now, or a couple of years now. Meaning online, so you can download the audio. But I don't know if anyone here has ever tried to listen to an oral arguments for the Supreme Court. Anyone? No. It's good because it is as if they're speaking a foreign language. I mean, it is incredibly difficult to understand what they're saying. I mean, sometimes it's sort of plain spoken exchanges, but usually I just think, oh my God, is this Swahili? I have no idea. So we have a very brilliant, very authoritative and seasoned and extremely good Supreme Court reporter, Adam Liptak. He is one of my personal favorites on the paper because he is just really wonderful and was a big help to me when I first moved to Washington in 2010. And he, he goes to every argument, and so we will pull. We will talk to him after the argument, and he's usually frantically on deadline writing his 17 front page stories. And we say, like, Adam, what are the most interesting exchanges? What's the big idea here in this case? Where do you think it's going? Because the point of the oral argument is that, like, listening to the judges spar gives you some sense of how they might rule. And you want to know the answer, right? You want to know how they. So we do that, but it is very hard because it's picking through, the Swahili. I mean, pardon me if anyone speaks to it. Swahili is like, but like I use that as a metaphor for something very difficult to understand. And Adam tells us, maybe these exchanges, but we kind of basically we have a producer listen to the whole thing, get a transcript of the whole thing, pull out the moments that we think will be illuminating to making the broader point. And that's the episode, but it takes hours and hours and hours of work to do that. But again, those shows are very, very popular because no one else does that, because it's so time consuming and it's so difficult. And it requires, like, both the kind of Adam brain part where he's like, these are the things you should bring up because these are the real big ideas behind it, but also the technical expertise of being able to do that and doing it on deadline is just incredibly difficult.
Who are your competitors?
There are a number of shows now. Today Explained, Vox has one, Post Reports, the Washington Post has one, the Journal has one as well. I think called the Journal. So many people have tried to replicate it.
And what about National Public Radio, BBC, or
they obviously are a radio. Do they have there's so many shows and wonderful shows on NPR and on BBC. There probably is. I'm actually not sure, but you could argue that sort of Morning Edition is a bit like this. But the thing that the people who invented the Daily did was, like, it's 20 minutes, and it's not a smattering of a bunch of things that you'll forget in 45 minutes. It's like, a deep treatment of one thing. So that, I think that is the thing that is truly unique about it. And that is the thing that's also truly hard to do.
Thank you for doing this. I have much more questions to ask, but I'm supposed to pick up questions from the audience. So please, just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm at the journalism school in the grad program. I was wondering, I have so many questions, but one thing I wanted to ask you was, I don't know if I understood your point of view very well, but I was kind of shocked when you mentioned you could kind of understand the Russian justification for the Georgian war and, not remembering if people died. And because to me, it seems like there's a continuation in that point of view that these lands belong to us. And, there was ethnic cleansing that happened in the territories that Russia controls in Georgia now. So in 2008 and then 2014 and then in 2022. So, like, why not see that more as a continuation of that perspective? And maybe can you just articulate, like, how you see the US Western NATO perspective of the war, Ukrainian perspective of the war versus the Russian perspective of the war? Like, I know that's not just like one perspective and the other perspective, but can you explain a little bit more of, instead of just us being totally shocked that Russia could have made this decision, like understanding why so many people do support it, including some Americans.
So many people support
Russia's total invasion in 2022. And the logic that was the continuing logic of 2008, I was had a very emotional response when you said, Saakashvili was crazy. It
Well,
just seems very
was-
dismissive.
It was, yeah, I was perhaps speaking too quickly. I think what the point I was trying to make was that, history is always so clear in retrospect, and it's very hard to see at the time where things might be going. And one thing that we're taught not to do as journalists is not to kind of make assumptions, right? You can't, you're sort of like looking at that isolated thing and trying to understand it and trying to explain it. And I guess the point I was trying to, you said your name is Megan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Megan. The point I was trying to make was, I felt that I was wrong. That in fact, when you do look back, there was a clear continuation, and this was, now we see it is quite, I don't know if you would call it genocidal, Jane, but I think one can make an argument that in fact it is that it is this kind of rabid sort of drive at this point to force his will and to say, these lands are nothing, and I'm gonna, it's by right they're mine. I mean, and that is, but that is something that I wish that I had been better at being able to see and predict. I mean, and it's something that I feel like Yevgenia, of all people, perhaps in the world, was like unique at being able to. I mean, she was the one who said, and I don't know, if everybody, I think everybody here knows Yevgenia, but those who don't, Yevgenia was out there really, I think, like quite bravely and in a lot of ways in the early days, in particular, quite alone in saying like, hey, Putin, this guy is like bad news. He comes from the, he comes from the KGB. We know how this is going to end. And we were not, I didn't know that. I really didn't. I felt like it wasn't clear to me at the time, either because I was too young and inexperienced as a reporter, or I wasn't steeped enough in kind of Russia and the KGB and really what that meant. It didn't feel heavily weighing on our minds in the kind of, late 1990s when all of, when he kind of started floating around, because it was like, capitalism and, it was just a different, really, if you cast your mind back to that time, it was a very, very different period in Russia's development. And it just wasn't something that, now looking back, it seems, as I said, it seems like there were breadcrumbs and it looks obvious, but it didn't look obvious at the time. But I don't know, Shane, if you have a different thought.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Julia.
Hi, Julia. Hi.
So in February of last year, I was in Paris, and I have these very visceral memories in the first days of the war of listening to you on the daily. The first couple of episodes you did with the War Patrol, the 24th, 25th, 26th, you're interviewing people, and I remember the overwhelming pessimism just the very first day of the people you spoke to, where you talked to a lot of people who were leaving, and there was some quote that day where it was someone saying, I don't think this country will be here by nightfall.
Yeah,
And
I think it's the bus station.
that turned around, obviously, but it also, even within your coverage, it turned around in a matter of days.
Mhm.
What was it like to witness that absolute peak of pessimism and then kind of see it not go as badly as it did?
Very good question.
Yeah, great question. I mean, as I was saying tell me your name again.
Julia.
Julia. Okay, thank you for listening, Julia. I appreciate it. So as I was saying to Yevgenia, I mean, the country of Ukraine was having the same reaction that I was and that our colleagues were, which was like, oh my, like, what's he gonna do? I mean, I think it really was like everybody, and it wasn't just journalists, I think, or the American government. It was like everybody was kind of like, living in terror of like the shoe dropping. And I remember actually being in the bus station and like there was like a plane flying above and everyone was like, oh God, like, so it felt like something might happen at any moment that would just like wipe out, I don't know, a city, a block, a building, or like, it just was like everybody was really on edge because no one knew what was going to happen. And then you know, the kind of realization that maybe that wasn't, I think, good question. It was sort of, I think it took a while for people to filter back because there was this huge exodus, in the first kind of week or so. And I think that weird column, I remember there was a column like on CNN for like a week. It was like, and I remember our editors were like, there's a column, but we were like, they don't seem to be moving very far. It was kind of, it was very hard to understand what was happening. And again, this is another kind of like war thing and like journalism thing, and just kind of, events are so much clearer in retrospect that like my metaphor for this, doing war correspondence is like you're in a snowstorm. And it's like the snow is coming at your face and you can barely see, and you're being asked on deadline to say, is that shape in the distance a bear or a moose? And you're like, it's a bear, it's a moose. You can't really, you're kind of like only getting little bits of information, and particularly in a war, right? You can't go everywhere, you can't ask everybody anything. You have like you're confined to like certain little places, and like in Iraq, little keyhole, you don't have that much information. You're just one little person on the ground, like kind of, seeing what you're seeing, but like you don't know what the big picture is. And you're trying to piece together, what is the story of the war in this place, when in fact, you don't know. So I think Ukrainians were having that same experience that, okay, the column maybe is stuck, but like, does that mean I like stay here and have my 11-year-old risk I don't even know what? I think it took a while for people to feel confident enough to kind of filter back.
This is something that I don't understand. Something we know now that Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Mr. Kuleba, came to Washington, D.C. and in October, Secretary of State Blinken briefed him about the upcoming war. He said, we know this now, that Americans had extremely good sources and they warned him about upcoming war. In December 2021, the current CIA chief, Bill Burns, the former ambassador to Moscow, flew to Kyiv. He flew also to Moscow, but he spoke with Mr. Patrushev, the one of the closest to Putin's advisors, and Patrushev basically told him, "We're going to do this." Patrushev was blunt. He bluntly told him that when Bill Burns said, that you understand that you will have, we're going to help Ukraine and blah blah blah, and Patrushev said, we're going to do this. We will manage this. And Burns went to Kyiv, and once again he met in Kyiv with the leadership of the country, and I believe with Zelensky himself. So basically, beginning October, Americans knew that Putin was going to do this. So why did it take everybody but such a surprise when eventually it did happen? Why everyone was so surprised?
I think people didn't believe the Americans. Did you?
Boy,
I mean, it's a mixture of what you want to believe and what you.
listen, I remember Michael Kaufman, then, one of the best US experts in the field. He wrote to me on Facebook, Yevgenia, you are idiots. Something like that. Michael, he's this type of guy, and you Russian liberals, you don't understand that the lorry already truck is coming at you, and you keep discussing about the kind of noise that this truck produces, something like that, And I was back then, I was doing shows about the upcoming war each week. But I'm surprised that, and I remember when I was listening to your interviews in Kiev, I was thinking, why people were so unprepared then?
There had been all this kind of media, media coverage that it was coming, because the Americans were releasing this stuff. And I remember friends in Kiev being kind of pretty blasé about it. And the Americans have been saying this for weeks, and who even knows? And this just seems impossible. And as it turns out, we learned that the Ukrainians were told. And I don't know what was, I don't know what was in their heads. People were analyzing kind of in those early days that they didn't want to panic their population. Perhaps they in part also didn't quite fully believe it. I don't know, but you're right. And you particularly of all people telegraphed all along that this is what he's doing. Clearly, it's what he's doing. Megan. Yeah, Megan, to your point. Yeah.
Molly Dean is writing on Zoom. After graduating from NYU, I have worked for CBS Radio News and launched a few podcasts for brands like CoinDesk and CNN. I like your voice better than Michael Barnard's. I'm sorry, but I feel like that. Hosting, okay. Do you hear others who prefer to hear your voice on the podcast? I don't want to put you in trouble. I know a couple of others.
We have two voices. Luckily, we're both in the show because the show takes up a lot of people power to make, and we're very different, so people have different tastes. Yeah.
Yes, please.
On that note, my name is Catherine. I'm at the journalism school.
Hi, Catherine.
Something that I always find myself asking whenever I listen to Daily is, and you kind of touched on it before. The idea of I'm just like picturing your work week. Like on Monday, you could be interviewing someone about Israel's political crisis, and then Tuesday maybe you have a follow-up on the invasion of Ukraine, and then maybe the rest, sprinkled in, you have some domestic news and international. And I understand that you have a team of producers that work alongside you. And I think you had mentioned that as a team, you all create questions and prep, but something that I'm curious about, because I come from a newspaper background, but I have a little bit of radio. The idea of like, what is that? I understand when you're preparing for an interview, you don't want to go in completely blind. Maybe you have your list of questions, but who knows what they're going to say? You need to at least have some kind of comfortable element or level when you're walking in. What does that preparation look like for you on like a Monday through Friday kind of deal? And is it substantively different from when you were maybe like a beat reporter or on
completely different beat reporter. Completely different beat reporter. Yeah, so the job that I currently have, my job is different than say the producer's jobs, right? So my job is a host job, which is kind of in a way like an editor job, right? It's like I'm looking across the paper. I have to keep track of lines of coverage, not every single thing, but like I need to kind of have in my head sort of what are the big storylines and what are the moments where we dip in to do an episode on any of those one given storylines. I happen to come from a background of international news, so that's a little bit my thing, but I still, I'm often doing domestic episodes as well. So, a beat reporter is like very deeply in a topic, knows every single person. You can call it, 5 a.m. on a Sunday when something, so that's definitely not my world anymore. Not that it ever actually was my world. I was never really a beat reporter like that. I was usually a foreign correspondent. But the preparing, it's sort of like, I don't know if you've done stuff for radio, but there is kind of, you sort of like think through, what the reporter's insights are, what the beats of the story were, and then kind of, come up with sort of meaty set of questions that will kind of like elicit, those points. So that's kind of, that's basically what it is.
Do you have somebody who's writing questions? for you?
Sometimes, yep.
Do you have somebody sitting on your ear, as we say?
No one in my
On the
ear.
radio?
No one in my ear. No,
Okay,
no.
yes, please.
Yes, Yuri, I mentioned coordinating committee to aid Ukraine. We've,
Hi, Yuri.
hello,
Hi.
we've spoken a lot about the element of surprise about Russian second attack on Ukraine in 2022. And then looking at the post-term that says journalism or propaganda. So we know that Russia has been doing a lot of the information warfare. And which of those narratives do you think have been most successful that people have bought into?
Which of the Russian narratives in Russia?
Towards the West. Audience like us.
Oh, what does the West believe about what Russia, about Russia propaganda? You mean that?
The question is if Russia was in fact engaged in information warfare over the last 10 years, which of those narratives do you think have been most successful?
In the West.
goodness, in line to us.
In the West.
In the West.
Which of the narratives have been most, name me some narratives. Which of the narratives have been most successful that Russia has?
Do you mean like that NATO started the war?
For the most part, we're probably pretty skeptical of Putin's reasoning for things. It seems a little bit unhinged.
Or
and-
direct or indirect. So for example, something that.
Yuri, tell me something what's in your mind? What's an example of a narrative you're thinking of that maybe has had some effect?
I think when we spoke to Mr. Kramer in New York Times, probably a month ago, he mentioned that New York Times was focused on corruption in Ukraine. And that was a big topic for him that he wanted to focus on. And now he'll probably write about the change in the civil society, change in the people's thinking, in the mentality of the people, and how that might affect the future of Ukraine. That's an example.
It's an example of Russian propaganda?
It's an example of a narrative that would be favored by Russian propaganda. Instead of a different narrative. We know that corruption exists, we know that we are fighting it, but that would, in Mr. Kramer's mind, that would not be the focus of his writing if he were able to travel back in time. So he would write more about the changes on Magadan. He would write
I see.
more
So he would have
the
written less
diversity of
about
the
corruption.
society, about inclusiveness, about the diversity.
First of all, Andrew Kramer is a wonderful colleague and has been very, very, very bravely chronicling what Russia has been up to in Ukraine and what Russia has been perpetrating on Ukraine at times when no one else in Western media was remotely interested in paying attention to that.
Since 2014, he was covering.
Correct. He kept going even after the spotlight went away and no one wanted to look at it and no one wanted to tweet about it and no one wanted to go cover it. He was there in 2015 and in 2016 and in 2017. So I admire very much Andrew's work. I think he's risked a lot to keep covering the conflict at great risk to himself. And without, a lot of I think he did it at a time that no one was very interested, which is, I think, hard in the news business. As for whether the narrative, sorry, I'm so stuck on this, whether this is a Russian narrative that perhaps worked, I think Russia has I think we kind of I think as Americans, we sort of were inclined to think, okay, maybe this Putin guy is gonna, is not such a bad guy. Or I think it was just, it wasn't from the early days. I don't think it was like, clearly, I don't think that there was a strong sense one way or the other. I think like if you think about the broader kind of trajectory of global events, it cast your mind back to 2000, right? That was when Putin came in. The US got extraordinarily distracted a year later with the September 11th attack. So I think that Russia was it had receded, just in terms of news and in terms of sort of what Americans were thinking about from the headlines and from people's minds. It just wasn't something that was really kind of on the front burner. And so, and again, like Yevgenia was one I remember very clearly was a real kind of, in a way, like keeping it on our radar and truth telling about it. And I think in a very brave way, and in a way that like people were, not focused and she was, and she got it right. I would say that. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I think Russia has an outsized sense of its own importance certainly in the world, and certainly, and I think also, in terms of US and US foreign policy. I mean, I think we, I think he's much more effective in Russia, as we've seen, and that, yeah, I think it's yeah, sorry. I'm not giving a very good answer to your question, Yuri, but
Yes, please.
Well, to follow on to that, don't you think that they were very effective in Russian propaganda and helping elect Trump? I mean, they did an outstanding job with that. Put embolden Putin, it's like, I can do anything now, look what we just did. So,
the election thing. Oof, that is really not my area. I know it's a huge thing, and Americans are, think about it a lot. I think it's like, I don't know. It's difficult to wade into this because everybody has a view. I think that like probably it's a little bit. I think that it can be that people on the left sort of over how much Russia actually had to do with the Trump election. I mean, I spent basically the past 4 years talking to Trump voters and talking to conservative voters in America, and I don't think that for the most part it was like, seeing bot stuff on Facebook. I think there was a lot of real stuff going on there. And I think that, maybe, I mean, I think there have been studies done about this. I mean, I don't know, Ezra Klein has talked about this on his podcast. I mean, it's a very complicated, very deep topic that, that there's been some kind of attempts through data to answer the question. And, I think it's, I don't think it's, yeah, I think I would be a little skeptical of sort of saying, placing the Trump victory at the feet of Vladimir Putin.
appreciate your view.
We're supposed to round this up, but yes, but let us make it this last question, please.
Hi, my name is Pallavi.
Hi, Paul.
I have a question on, you touched a bit about how you decide to make which story to make the focus of each day. And I find it's really interesting when you covered Silicon Valley Bank recently. It was one of the first times I realized that you cut in the day before, you were like, oh, we are going to cover this tomorrow. Like, do not worry, like, don't freak out. So I thought that was interesting. Is there an area that you wish the Daily could have more time to focus on, like something that we're not covering as much, or you're covering as much right now? Like if you had that 6th day.
Oh my gosh, please don't give me another day. No, 10 users, stop using us. We're tired. I think, but it's a good question though. Is there something else? I mean, I would love to have more. I would love to have more conversations about Russia, for example. I mean, we, there's so much going on there. It's so difficult to, get info, talk to people, have conversation with people in Russia. I mean, I think that is a huge black box in a way that it in some ways it holds the key to kind of our understanding of everything, and we know the least about it. So that would be wonderful. I mean, there's so many things I think, it would be great to be able to go more deeply into. Just I think that like underneath the news is a very interesting space, and it can be a space that really gives you a better, deeper understanding of exactly why it is the news that you're seeing on the top is happening. But it just takes time to do that. And and so it's hard. But maybe that's a good suggestion for a 6th day.
Don't take up on it.
Okay, thank you.
So I think our time is up. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming and thank you so much. And
Thanks, Shane.
please,
Yes.
please just remember
Yes.
that, each morning wake up and they need to hear. This is something that please. Thank you.